Deciding where to store data on the storage, known as allocation, is a critical function of any file system. Allocation impacts fragmentation, which directly impacts performance. The StorNext file system uses a variety of techniques to intelligently allocate space and minimize fragmentation. One of these is optimistic allocation. Optimistic means that the allocator assumes that where one allocation of space is required for a file, there is likely to be another. It therefore allocates more space than requested, assuming it will be needed soon. If you're old enough to remember video arcade games, you know that you got one play for a quarter. When I would ask my dad for a quarter to play a video game, he was smart enough to know that additional requests were likely to follow. So rather than allocating me just the 1 quarter I'd asked for, he would give me $1 or 2's worth. In other words, he optimistically allocated quarters. This reduced the fragmentation of my game playing time. The StorNext file system allocator does a very similar thing with storage, just in a more sophisticated way. The size of the space allocated scales in 10 escalating steps according to the file size. As a file gets bigger, the allocations get bigger. This minimizes the number of fragments per file while limiting over-allocation of space. Let's walk through an example. Say we have a 16 megabyte file stored as a single contiguous chunk, and an application begins writing new data to it in 1 megabyte chunks up to 32 megabytes. Without optimistic allocation, the file could consist of up to 17 discontiguous segments on the storage. And that's going to hurt when it comes time to read that file. With optimistic allocation, space is allocated in 4 megabyte chunks, even though the application is writing 1 megabyte at a time. The result is that the maximum number of discontiguous segments for this file is reduced to just 5, which will improve performance when the file is read. You may be thinking that in the age of solid-state storage, none of this clever trickery matters. You can just throw a bunch of flash at the problem and not worry about contiguous allocation, right? Well, that's partially true. But even with flash, allocations still incur overhead that can affect performance, so it's always best to minimize them. And why buy more flash when hard disks will do? Optimistic allocation is just one of the many ways that StorNext reduces storage costs by squeezing the maximum performance out of every storage technology.